Welcome to the Moon and Gemini podcast. I am your witch in residence, April Edwards. This is our deep dive, the space where we slow down and explore the deep layers of astrology, the places where symbolism becomes myth and myth becomes a way of understanding ourselves. Today we are diving into one of the most powerful creative transits we can experience astrologically, Jupiter in Leo. This is not a quiet transit. It is not subtle. It does not ask us to shrink, hide, or remain emotionally disconnected from our desires. Jupiter in Leo arrives like sunlight breaking through heavy cloud cover. It amplifies visibility, ambition, creativity, confidence, leadership, artistry, and the deep human desire to leave something meaningful behind. But beneath all of that radiance is a much deeper initiation taking place. Because Jupiter in Leo is not simply about becoming bigger. It's about becoming more fully embodied in your creative authority. This transit asks us to bridge the gap between fleeting inspiration and enduring legacy. It asks us to transform raw creative fire into something sustainable, something disciplined, something capable of surviving beyond emotional highs, temporary motivation, or public validation. And that distinction matters deeply, because Leo energy is often misunderstood. Modern astrology tends to flatten Leo into stereotypes about attention-seeking, ego, drama, or performance. But true Leo energy is sacred solar energy. It is the force of creation itself. Leo governs the heart, not just emotionally, but spiritually. The heart is where courage lives. The heart is where creative truth lives. The heart is where identity becomes animated with life force, and Jupiter magnifies whatever it touches. So when Jupiter enters Leo, our creative instincts become impossible to ignore. People begin feeling restless inside old identities. There is often a sudden desire to create, lead, express, perform, teach, build, or finally share something that has been waiting quietly beneath the surface for years. Many people experience a resurgence of confidence under this transit. Others reconnect to passions they abandoned long ago in the name of practicality, survival, or emotional protection. Jupiter in Leo reminds us what it feels like to want something again. Not because it is useful, not because it is efficient, but because it makes us feel alive. And for many people, that awakening can feel both exhilarating and terrifying. Because creativity always exposes us. The moment we create publicly, we become visible. We risk judgment, rejection, comparison, failure, embarrassment. Leo energy understands this deeply because Leo is one of the most emotionally vulnerable signs in the zodiac. It takes enormous courage to let yourself be witnessed authentically. And Jupiter expands that entire emotional landscape. Under this transit, many people will feel pulled towards greater visibility professionally and personally. Some may launch businesses, others may begin teaching, publishing, creating content, performing, leading communities, or stepping into public-facing work. There is often an intense urge to stop minimizing oneself. But here's where the deeper lesson begins. Jupiter expands both wisdom and excess. And in Leo, excess often appears through inflation of the ego. This is where inspiration becomes performance, where authenticity becomes branding, where creativity becomes trapped inside the need for applause. One of the greatest dangers of Jupiter in Leo is confusing visibility with value. This transit can seduce people into believing that external recognition is proof of internal worth. It can create cycles of overextension, burnout, performative identity, and constant pressure to maintain momentum. Some people will become addicted to being perceived rather than devoted to the actual work itself. And eventually, that becomes spiritually exhausting. Because sustainable creativity cannot survive if it is entirely dependent on external validation. This is why Jupiter in Leo ultimately becomes a lesson in refinement. The transit asks, can your creativity survive structure? Can your visions survive discipline? Can your gifts mature beyond inspiration? Can you continue creating even when no one is applauding? Because legacy is not built through intensity alone. It is built through consistency. And this is where the symbolism of the sun becomes incredibly important. The sun does not burn brighter one day and disappear the next depending on audience response. It radiates because radiance is its nature. Its power comes through consistency, reliability, steadiness. Jupiter in Leo asks us to embody the same kind of creative steadiness. Not louder expression, anchored expression. Not chaotic ambition, directed ambition. Not endless performance, embodied authority. This transit is asking us to mature our relationship with creative power. And that maturation requires structure. One of the strongest themes of Jupiter in Leo is the necessity of building infrastructure beneath inspiration. This is especially true professionally. Many people will receive enormous creative downloads during this period. New ideas arrive quickly, confidence increases, vision expands, but without grounding, fire burns itself out. This transit rewards people who are willing to build sustainable systems around their gifts. The artist who commits to routine instead of waiting for inspiration. The entrepreneur who creates long-term strategy rather than chasing visibility. The healer who refines their craft quietly over time. The leader who understands stewardship matters more than charisma. Leo is fixed fire. Unlike Aries, which ignites quickly and moves on, Leo sustains flame. It nourishes it, tends it, protects it. So Jupiter in Leo is not asking us to create one brilliant moment. It's asking us to create a body of work, a life architecture, something enduring. And that process requires confronting the shadow side of ambition itself. Because many people are going to realize under this transit that they have been scattering their life force into too many directions at once. Too many personas, too many unfinished visions, too many attempts to secure validation externally instead of cultivating inner authority. Jupiter in Leo exposes where ego has become unstable, but it also offers profound healing around self-worth. This reconnects people to the right to take up space, and that is deeply important, especially for those who have spent years minimizing themselves to remain safe, accepted, or emotionally protected. Jupiter in Leo reminds us that shrinking does not create humility. Sometimes shrinking is simply fear disguised as modesty. Healthy Leo energy is not arrogance. It is self-trust. It is the willingness to let your gifts exist visibly in the world without apologizing for their presence. And yet, true Leo energy is also generous. At its highest expression, Leo does not dominate rooms. It illuminates them. It encourages others to become more fully themselves as well. This is why Jupiter in Leo can create extraordinary leadership energy when consciously embodied. Not leadership ruled in control, but leadership rooted in inspiration. People with mature Leo energy lead through embodiment. They become examples of what becomes possible when someone fully inhabits their creative center. And this becomes especially significant collectively, because we are living in a time where people feel disconnected from meaning, artistry, joy, and authentic self-expression. There is widespread burnout, emotional numbness, cynicism, survival mode. Jupiter in Leo interrupts that contraction by reigniting the creative life force itself. But again, the lesson is not indulgence. The lesson is integration. This transit does not ask us to abandon practicality for fantasy. It asks us to align creatively with sustainability, to create structures capable of holding larger visions. to stop treating joy as separate from purpose, to understand that devotion to one's creative path is not frivolous, it is life-giving. And there is another important layer here. Leo governs the inner child. Not in the superficial sense of childishness, but in the sense of original creative essence, the part of us that once created instinctively before shame interrupted expression, before criticism taught us to self-monitor, before adulthood convinced us that usefulness mattered more than aliveness. Jupiter in Leo often resurrects forgotten desires. Old dreams return, creative instincts awaken. People remember who they were before survival became their dominant operating system. And that remembrance can be profoundly emotional, because it forces us to confront how much of ourselves we abandoned in order to be acceptable, productive, or emotionally safe. This transit asks, what would happen if you stopped treating your creativity as optional? What if your joy actually mattered? What if your gifts required stewardship instead of suppression? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of life could emerge if your ambition became aligned with your soul rather than your insecurity? Because ultimately, the highest expression of Jupiter in Leo is not fame, it's creative sovereignty. The ability to create, lead, express, and contribute from an internally anchored center that no longer depends entirely on audience response to feel legitimate. This transit teaches us that ego is not something we are meant to destroy completely. Spiritual maturity is not self-erasure. Healthy ego gives spirit structure. It allows creativity to incarnate into the material world through identity, authorship, and personal vision. Jupiter in Leo expands our capacity to inhabit ourselves more fully, to stop fragmenting our energy, to stop apologizing for our presence, to stop waiting for permission to create the life we actually desire. But it also reminds us that fire must be tended carefully if it's going to last. That means nervous system regulation, rest, discipline, consistency, financial grounding, energetic boundaries, long-term thinking. Because the brightest flames are not always the ones that explode dramatically. Often the brightest flames are the ones that continue burning steadily long after others have burned themselves out. And that is the deeper wisdom of this transit. Jupiter in Leo is not asking us to perform greatness. It is asking us to embody it slowly enough that it becomes sustainable, to allow inspiration to mature into devotion, to allow visibility to mature into responsibility, to allow ambition to mature into contribution, and to understand that legacy is not built in singular moments of brilliance. It is built through repeated acts of courageous self-expression over time. So during this transit, ask yourself, what am I truly trying to create? What deserves my sustained devotion? Where have I confused external attention with authentic fulfillment? And what would it look like to build a life that can actually hold the magnitude of my vision? Because that is the real invitation of Jupiter in Leo. Not simply to shine, but to become someone capable of sustaining the light that they carry. This work grows through word of mouth. If it's been meaningful to you, you can like, share, or subscribe. That is how it reaches the ones who need it.